Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we tackle a single relevant question based on our Bible reading for that day. This week our reading is centered around the book of John, and today I'm joined by Jay Rivenbark and Chris Rexroad, and our question today comes from John chapter 11. So, in summary, without reading the whole story, this is the story of Lazarus, and he dies, and they bury him. But Jesus knows before he dies, and he's sick, and that he's sick, and he doesn't go. And, there's a lot of moving pieces to this. But outside of the disciples, Lazarus, Mary, and Martha are mentioned predominantly in the Gospels. They make a significant place, in the Gospels. One is a story of Jesus going to their house, and Martha gets a lot of flack because she's working and serving, and Mary's sitting at Jesus' feet. But in this story, and we don't often talk about this because the focus tends to be on the resurrection, Jesus coming. But in this story, they respond exactly opposite, or at least, in my opinion, it appears to be opposite. Maybe you have a different view, where Martha comes out to meet Jesus and is having the conversation with Jesus, and Mary's back at the house, mostly pouting is how I would probably describe it. Grieving.
Yeah.
But she didn't come out to see Jesus, so I put some pout in there because, you would think she would have come out and seen her friend. So why is it that you think Mary and Martha seem to respond exactly opposite? Or differently in this story than they did when Jesus visits the house, or maybe you see it as the same way. Maybe you have a different point of view.
Well, the first thing that I've already threw in there was grief. I have experienced it, and I have seen it with other people that typically they may lean or behave a certain way. Typically, their behavior would be predictable, but when they're experiencing overwhelming grief or trauma, they respond in ways that you wouldn't expect. And so I do think that plays a big role in it, and perhaps we're getting some insight to some of their personalities and that we haven't seen before because of the circumstances are different here.
Yeah, that's actually a good spot for me to piggyback onto that, because that's what I was thinking with Mary and Martha. Martha seems like a classic type A. Let's get it done. Let's be precise. Let's do all this. So I could see her being in the first part. She's in the back working and making sure everything's right for this very important person that's in the room. And then in the passing of Lazarus, she's the one that's wanting to, hey, what's going on? What happened? Why weren't you here? Type thing. And Mary strikes me as a lot more of an emotional, heartfelt person from what I gather. So I could see her back there, like Jay was saying, grieving and struggling with this. And I've seen people when their loved ones have passed that, my mom was actually this way when my dad passed. She kept herself very busy, and that helped her. That was kind of her therapy during that time. But other people need to just sit and grieve. And so, people respond differently.
Grieving can change your personality.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Significantly.
Yeah.
And losing someone can change your personality. I can think of a few people in my life who I knew, who lost a spouse, and how I perceived them anyway completely changed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe they were that way all along, and the other person just restricted it, balanced it out, diminished it. I don't know, but it appeared to me like, where did you come from?
Yeah,
like this is not good. And everybody does deal with grief differently.
Absolutely. I have seen, as you said, some people change significantly, and it was for a time, it was a duration, it was seasonal. It seemed like then they made more of a circle back to who and what they were. And for some of them, they changed on a level and trajectory that they were never the way they were, or at least appeared.
And some people, it looks like they're not bothered by it at all. You know, I remember as a young man, the family telling stories about my kid's mom and how her parents died 9 months apart when she was 12,
No.
and how she when they were Mormon, and so they had a viewing at the house, and things that they do. And when people would come in, she was standing at the door, smiling, greeting everybody, passing out tissues. Here's the clinics if you need it. And it, now in retrospect, I look back, 40 years later and think, okay, I can see that. And I see, like, even in my daughter is tempered much like her, and I could see how that would be her. You would not know something was wrong. Typically, you would not know something was wrong. I tend to respond differently.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not a crier or a weeper generally. I do cry, but typically not at funerals or loss. That's not how I'm moved. I'm a very reflective person. I process it. I tend to be quiet. I often don't know what to say in those moments. I don't know what to say myself for myself, and I don't know what to say to others who are in that spot. And I find, like, visitations are often, that's what we call them, wakes, whatever. What's the right terminology, Jay?
I think most people say visitation.
Yeah.
Where you sit with people, and lots of them you haven't seen for a while, and the conversations are rarely about the dead person.
Yeah.
Or about how you're dealing with grief. They're just frivolous conversations about whatever may have happened that day, those kind of things. And so I do think everybody responds differently to grief, and you don't know. Your description of Mary being more emotional and, Martha being more matter of fact does play out in this story. She's okay. Let's deal with what we got to deal with. Jesus, why won't you here? And what are you going to do about it? Those are two kind of things, and I could see myself in that, and I identify way more with Martha in both of these stories than I do with Mary. But any other pieces of this story that?
No, I would just say, we see some difference in them here. It seems like there's some, perhaps what can be construed as role reversals, and you go back to the other story, and it seemed like one was unfocused. But I would say it points out the importance of we're all wired differently. Our personalities are different. Our skill sets and strengths are different. And it's not that any of them are right or wrong or better than the other, but there is a right time and place to use and exercise those. And sometimes we make assessments of people based on the current circumstances, and because they don't respond or react the way we do, sometimes we can look at them perhaps critically when maybe we shouldn't. And maybe when we realize we respond differently when difficult times come, that we could have a little more grace and patience with other people during it.
And I think it is important to understand I sat in a meeting recently, and the other person cried the entire time. And I didn't. And it was an interpersonal situation that we were trying to sort through. And from their perspective, they were like, "You don't care." Well, no, that ain't it. It's just like, no, I'm trying to deal with the issue.
Exactly.
And if I start crying and let my emotions get out of for me, I'm just speaking for me. If my emotions overtake, it's not going to turn out good on my side. So what I need to keep as focused as I possibly can, But you're fine. Like, if that's how that's what you need to do, then I'm okay with that. Like, I didn't think, okay, you're just too emotional, get yourself together so we can deal with this. That's not how I approached it. But I do think there is extreme value in understanding that everybody deals with everything differently.
Yep.
I've always used the description when I was talking about church, but it applies here. Why are there so many different styles of worship and we tend to be segregated? And I said, I've always said, if you lined 100 people up here in front of the church down the road, and 2 cars came at each other as fast as they could and ran into each other, let's say it's an accident, but that's the scenario. All 100 people are going to respond differently.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are going to be shocked into silence. Other people are going to scream and holler and run around like they got their head cut off, like they were the one in the car.
Yeah.
And then there are going to be other people who's going to think, all right, what do I need to do right now to help solve this problem?
That's right.
And everybody responds differently. So it doesn't mean everybody doesn't grieve.
Right.
It doesn't mean everybody don't experience pain. It's just we all deal with it differently. Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope that you will be back with us tomorrow as we continue our conversation around the book of John.